2 nights here, I guess. Yeah.
Gotten okay with the jet lag?
Not really.
Oh, no, okay.
I just wake up way, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning.
Is this your first time in Singapore?
No, maybe at least 3, maybe 4 times here.
So actually, one of the questions I had is like, what's your observation about Singapore? Do you have an observation or what strikes you about this country?
The city is very impressive. Beautiful buildings, an appreciation for beauty. We spent yesterday touring the orchid display at the park by the marina. And of course, everything's very efficient and clean. You don't see graffiti. You don't see much litter. Singapore's known for that. The other thing that's interesting, because I've been to many Asian countries, is that Singaporeans are a little bolder, more assertive. So, for example, if you're speaking at a session and you open it up for questions and answers, people actually raise their hand and ask questions. You go to Japan and they would just sit there. They would never volunteer. This would not be appropriate. So, as a speaker, I like that because it's more responsive and you get good feedback.
Okay. What do you feel about Singapore coffee?
Singapore coffee? We have mainly been getting our coffee at Starbucks, so it's a lot like American coffee.
Haven't tried the local
This
one?
particular coffee is not so good.
That's what she said just now.
It tastes very watery, doesn't it?
I didn't know whether it's me or it's the coffee.
No, it's the coffee. It's the coffee, yeah.
Okay, so you haven't really had the local.
No, what would you recommend?
One of the chains, Toast Box or Ya Kun. You should have
I haven't seen
over here.
either of those.
We can get you some coffee.
Okay.
Do you have it black or with sugar or?
I'm fine, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's pretty different.
Yeah.
Okay. Are we ready to start? Okay. Yeah, so actually I wanted to cover three sections of the interview. The interview will cover 3 sections. One of it is you as a speaker, being invited to speak a lot on Where Is God When It Hurts, which is the book that got you, put you in the limelight. And then the second one's in your encounters with trauma. So your observations and how that perspective has changed over the years. And the last one is actually a more personal thing, which is when you had your accident and then you mentioned that life boiled down to several basic questions that mattered. So hope to expand a bit more on that, and we'll get you in person on how it has been, how living that way has been for you, because it's been about 10 plus years. 12 years.
Right, 12 years now.
And you mentioned at the start that you knew it would be challenging, but just how challenging was it? So these will be the 3 sections of the interview.
Sure.
Okay. Will you be able to share like the different spaces you have spoken on the topic? Any particular event or location that stood out for you? I know you wrote the book, the follow-up book in 2012, where the question never goes away.
Right.
So Sandy Hook and the tsunami were key events. But since then, has there been any location that stands out in terms of being invited to speak?
Right. This year, 2019, was actually the 20th anniversary of Columbine, which was kind of the first publicized school shooting in the United States. And it's only half an hour from my home. It's very close by. I was out of town when the original tragedy happened in 1999, but I was invited to speak at the 20th anniversary. And there's an artist who's a Christian from Japan named Mako Fujimura. Do you know that name?
The Kintsugi guy.
Fujimura.
Okay.
He's pretty well known in the Christian community in the United States. He's a fine artist, makes his living at that, and then formed an organization called the International Arts Movement to bring Christians together in the arts. But anyway, he made a kintsugi bowl. Do you know that name?
Yeah.
Kintsugi? Or he didn't make it. He brought it. He does make some, but this one was 500 years old, and then several hundred years ago, it was still in pieces for 200 years. It was melded together with the gold, and he presented it as a gift to Columbine. And that was, it was a service where there were a lot of families of survivors and survivors who were there. The principal at the time was there. Some professors, teachers were there, and they spoke. And so many of them said to me, we dreaded this event because every 5 years, every 10 years, they bring it up again and they have to relive this trauma that they've been through. But actually, they said, we went away inspired and encouraged. And it was, the Kintsugi Bowl expresses how beauty can emerge from brokenness. And in no way would anyone wish that the Columbine event happened, or the tsunami happened, or so many of these tragedies. But yet, once they have happened, we have a choice. We can either become resentful and demoralized, or we can look for ways to be resilient and to create something meaningful and even beautiful. And there were a lot of examples of that. Some of the stories of these young children, they were 17 years old when it happened, and now they're 37 years old. They have families of their own. Some were disabled permanently. But it was an inspiring event to hear the stories of how we can bounce back, and the things that we think we wish were most untrue can become kind of linchpins in our life, which is what I experienced when I had my own near-death experience.
Okay. Yeah, so actually the Columbine shooting, speaking at the event, and then 2012 was Sandy Hook, where you spoke at it, and then Virginia Tech in 2007.
Right.
And you have always explored this question of suffering.
Right.
But am I right? Is it right to say that these were quite key incidents in terms of where you spoke at?
Mm-hmm. You are.
Okay.
Yes.
So would you say that your perspective on suffering has changed? Because first you explored this topic from your own faith, exploring it, talking to people, and then encountering it, the survivors over these 3 events over a span of 13 years.
Right.
How has your perspective on suffering changed?
Early on, I was obsessed with the question of God's involvement. To what degree is God involved in the bad things that happen on this earth? And I concluded it's kind of a dead-end question. We can't really know the answer to that. And the more and more I looked at the Bible, the more I realized the Bible avoids that topic too. The disciples, the Pharisees, kept trying to pin Jesus down. Why was this man born blind? And why did the tower fall on these people? And Jesus never answered their questions. And of course, the one book in the Bible that fixates on that very issue is the book of Job. And again, God doesn't answer Job's questions, why it occurred. It's almost as if, that's my realm, that's not your realm, you couldn't possibly understand it. And the emphasis is, we can't control that. What we can do is ask for help in our response. And what Jesus said when the disciples asked him about the blind man, he said, this was done so that the works of God may be manifest in him. And that is something that we can pray for, work for, and as a church work toward. Sometimes, I think very rarely, as in the case of the man born blind, the works of God can be manifested in a miracle of healing. More often, it's not. More often, it's parents who live with a disabled child. And it's a long and difficult road.
May I join you?
But when you have, for example, Johnny Erickson, I think is a name known here, Johnny Erickson, Tata. I've been hearing from her lately because it's her 40th anniversary of her ministry. So she's been at it 40 years. And to me, that's it's more impressive to see what I call pain redeemed. I remember interviewing Johnny almost 40 years ago. I was working for a youth magazine, Campus Life, and she was still a very young person. And she had no idea what her future could be like. She was still hurt and depressed and upset and angry and ashamed. And now she looks back and would say, the best thing that ever happened to me was when I broke my neck diving. I can't say that about Johnny. She said that about her own life. And when you see what she goes through just to get through a day, that's a remarkable statement. But she truly believes it. She says, if that accident hadn't happened, I would have just been a normal suburban mother and wife, with a minivan, and she loved horses, maybe have some horses for my kids to play with, but now my life has meaning and purpose. I'm leaving a legacy of a prophetic legacy of calling the church to care for the disabled in a way they never had before. And that's a beautiful example, to me, more impressive, the works of God being made manifest than if Johnny had been healed.
Okay, so in that sense, so at the start it started with the dead end question, and right now your focus is on the redemption.
Correct. Yeah. Not so much the question of why, but the question of to what end. To what end can it be redeemed?
Okay. Is there anything else that has changed in terms of your perspective on suffering?
Yes. I've often wondered why doesn't the Bible give us a clearer explanation at some point? The Apostle Paul would tackle major issues. Why didn't he just write one letter to a church that was really going through suffering and answer that question? And he did often talk about the good that can come out of it. In fact, every major passage in the New Testament on suffering talks about patience and hope and perseverance, these good things. That's the redeemed pain I spoke of. And the more I think of it, the more I think it didn't really occur to the Bible writers, because they assume that this planet is invaded by evil. This planet does not operate by the rules that God had in mind at creation. God had in mind life that was flourishing, not full of pain and suffering. And I think they saw these two great forces, this force of evil and the force of good. And they, when something bad happened, they automatically assumed, well, God is as displeased with this as I am. And I would say the same thing. I say to the people in Japan after the tsunami, when I'm speaking on that, I'll often show this photo of an actual photo of a mother 1 year later who would go to the little school where her daughter died, and every day spend time going through the boxes of things that they picked up on the beach and in the school, looking for some scrap of memory of her daughter. And to me, that's just a very small picture. I mean, that's what we humans do when we lose somebody we love. And I'm confident that God, to the degree that woman grieves, God grieves far more. To the degree that woman is unhappy about what happened, God is also unhappy. This is a planet that is incomplete. It's not the way God had in mind. And to judge God by these kinds of things that happen, even a natural disaster like the tsunami, is to judge God by a beautiful work of art that has been spoiled by a graffiti artist. I think that's how the New Testament writers saw the world around us.
Thank you. Um, Moving on to the second section, which is your encounters with trauma. Are there any trends that you have identified in terms of the trauma and brokenness in this world? Has it changed over the years that you look into these instances? So, would you say that trauma and brokenness 20 years ago, 30 years ago actually, has changed from what's happening today?
Well, in the United States, it has, because social media has, in a perverted sense, made heroic some of the people who perpetrate these crimes. We talk about copycat murders. Whenever the anniversary of Columbine rolls around, somebody wants to do something similar. Even this year, they arrested a woman, and they were hunting for a woman who came with weapons on the day of the anniversary of Columbine. And then, in addition to that, media in general makes us aware of every bad thing that happens, every tragedy that happens. So 30 years ago, this terrible thing that happened in the mosque in New Zealand, we would hear about it maybe distantly a few days later. Now it's live on CNN within an hour. And that's true of every disaster, every natural disaster, every human-caused disaster. So it's in our face all the time. And I know many people, especially younger people of your generation, who won't even look at the news just because they say it just depresses me, and there's nothing I can do about it. And I think part of it is we're just saturated by seeing so much trauma in our faces all the time. And it's like life is a form of post-traumatic stress disorder, Not just post-traumatic, it's like in the midst of traumatic. We're just aware of it all the time.
So,
And that is new then. I remember back, this is more than 30 years ago, when President Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. I was in high school, and how gripped the nation was by that. It's like history stopped for a few days. Of course, then the assassin was killed, and it just went on. But it seems like those things happen weekly now. And they may have been happening weekly back then, but we just didn't know about it to the same degree.
when you say that we're being saturated by trauma and just this whole influx of being bombarded, how do you think it changes people's perspective in terms of the people that you have met, the people that you've come across? Does it inform them, or does it get them jaded? What has your observation been?
Well, the people who live through trauma, I'm thinking of the statistic that you hear a lot in the United States, that more veterans have died by suicide than died in the Vietnam War, for example, in the years since. More Vietnam vets died by suicide. I think that I have that correct. And war is a terrible thing. It is a trauma. It's not new. It's always been with us. But it seems like, as a nation, speaking of my own nation, that we have not provided the help, the kind of community support that people who go through trauma need. In the case of the school shootings, actually, in America, they've worked very hard at that, so that every school has had seminars on how to deal with it, how to respond when it's going on, and then a flood of help that comes in after the shootings happen. So, that's a good thing. It's sad that we have to utilize those resources so often. at the same time, there's a lot of divisiveness going on in the world. And like in that issue, the whole gun control issue is a major divisive issue in the United States. And you would think after so many of these events, and you see how quickly Australia changed their gun laws after the Port Arthur shootings years ago, and then how quickly New Zealand, like almost instantly the next day, started changing their gun laws after the tragedy in the mosque. But in the United States, there's so much division, there's so much divisiveness in the media that exploits that it's not a good situation at all. So the trauma, of course, affects the people involved. It actually affects the whole community, the whole society. And just as I mentioned, especially younger people, some of them won't even look at the news. That's true of a lot of people in the United States. They don't want to hear about it. They don't want to know about it. They don't want to absorb it, which is not a healthy thing either. Denial is not a healthy response either.
Okay. In what other ways have you seen people reacting? So whereas in the past it would be a question of where is God, right now, because you're being bombarded, one of the ways that people cope is denial. Are there other ways that you have seen people cope with this influx of media and suffering and things like that? Anything to add?
There are certainly healthier responses. I think of Japan after the tsunami, which was a massive thing. Almost 20,000 people died. And there was this whole generation in Japan that they called the lost generation. And I can't remember the Japanese word for it, but there were thousands of young people, especially young men, who never went out of their homes. They would just lock themselves in, and stay in their bedroom while they're playing video games, And the whole society was kind of concerned about these people, rightly so. And after the tsunami, some of them did come out of their homes and did volunteer and did help with the cleanup, and they found a meaning and a purpose that they did not have before. So that's certainly a healthy thing. The same thing happened in the United States after the shootings at the school in Florida. This whole teenage movement started about trying to get young people involved in politics, especially on the gun issue. So those are much healthier responses. On the one extreme, you have the denial or the almost paralysis, and on the other hand, you have those who are inspired to action.
Okay, thank you very much. The last part is about your brush with death, the car accident. You wrote about a few basic questions that mattered. Can you share about these basic questions just briefly?
Yes. Well, I certainly wasn't planning the accident. It just kind of happened. And I was hurt, but I wasn't that hurt in terms of pain. In fact, when I was first taken to the hospital, this tiny little clinic in rural Colorado, when the accident happened, I was just walking around, picking up things in my computer and my skis and different things that were strewn all over. We later went back and paced off, and I had the vehicle had turned over and over 5 times. So it was a very loud, dramatic thing that happened. Fortunately, the car landed right side up, so the wheels were on the ground. Turned out I had a broken neck. I didn't know it at the time, but if it had been upside down and I loosened my seatbelt, I would have come down on my neck and it could have been the end. So was taken to the hospital, the little clinic, and they weren't all that concerned either, because they would say on a scale of 1 to 10, where is your pain? So between a 6 and a 7 maybe. And they said, well, just wait here. And they were dealing with kids who fell down and skinned their knees and were coughing, those kind of things. And I'm just lying there strapped down. And they did the scan, the CT scan, and had to wait quite some time. They had a machine, but they didn't have a radiologist to read the machine, so they had to send everything to Australia. It took some time. They said it may take 45 minutes. It didn't take that long. And then they came in kind of rushing and said, oh, my goodness, we have to redo this, but this time with dye, nuclear dye, to see if your artery has been punctured because your neck is broken. There are these little pieces of bone, and if one of them has punctured the artery, and this is what the doctor said. He said, we have a jet standing by to fly you to Denver for surgery, but just between you and me, if the artery has been punctured, you won't make it to Denver. So here's a phone, call the people you love and tell them goodbye just in case. So I went from, just being irritated that I was strapped down for all this time and nobody's paying attention to me for 45 minutes to, oh no, And then they sent me in and did the dye, and then I did make a few of those phone calls. And so then I had a long time just to wait, because once again, they needed 45 minutes to get the next batch. And so I'm thinking, wow, this is strange. I mean, I feel pain, but in 5 minutes I could be gone. I could be dead, What a bizarre situation. And then I started thinking, well, let's see, I'm a Christian author, and I need to come up with something as my last words, And so I was thinking about that. And two different tracks. You just never know what's going to occur to your mind at a time like that, because, the trauma of the shock and everything else. One track was, I had been climbing the mountains in Colorado. There are 54 mountains over, we say 14,000 feet. I think it's 4,300 meters. And we call them 14ers. And one of the cool things to do in Colorado is to climb all the 14ers. There are 54 of them. And at that point, I had climbed 51 of the 54. So my first thought was, I can't die. I've got 3 left to climb, which is kind of ridiculous when you're facing death. But then more seriously, I started thinking, wow, if I did write that article, if I lived to write that article, what am I learning? This is one of those unique events where I'm facing death that could happen within 5 minutes, So what is worth spending my energy on, spending my time on? And the 3 questions I came up with were, who do you love? The doctor had said, call the people you love and tell them goodbye. Who's on that list? And so who do I love? What have I done with my life? Because it is a time when you can review and say, what do I wish was different? What should I have done that is different than I did? And then am I ready for whatever is next? Because I had grown up in this fundamentalist church with a lot of hellfire and brimstone and fear of death, and this angry God who dangles you like a spider over hellfire and it's going to drop you in, a lot of those kind of sermons that I always thought when I face death, even though I write about grace and believe in it, when I face death, those fears will come surging back. I always thought, and they didn't. About the potential of dying, and I think a lot of it is because I've learned to trust God. I believe God is a God of grace and mercy and love and forgiveness. And am I ready for whatever is next? Well, I think it was, and I trusted God with that, and believe that whatever it is, it'll be better. So those are the 3 things that just jumped out at me. And I thought of so much of our lives we spend on achievement and accumulating. The United States, I mean, I've seen crazy rich Asians. It's not so different here. So much has to do with possessions and status, and driving the right car, and living in the right house, and having the right handbag and clothing and all that. And we're just barraged with advertisements that say, this is what matters. This is what matters. Well, when you could be 5 minutes from death, it doesn't matter at all. Not once did I think, how many books have I sold? How much money do I have? If you're going to die in 5 minutes, it doesn't really matter whether you have $1 or $1 billion. It's irrelevant. And what kind of car do I drive? Well, mine was being towed to a junkyard, so I couldn't even drive it. So it was a wake up call, and I later realized those 3 questions are questions that I should live my life around every day. Who do I love? And what have I done with my life? What should I be doing with my life? And am I ready for whatever is next? Living in awareness of the most important things. And for a time, I was heavily aware of that every day. But then life takes over, The plumbing starts leaking, and the deer eat my flowers, and just dealing with life, it's easy to crowd out those important things and just to kind of get through the to-do list. It takes a traumatic incident to break that day-to-day habit and make you think of things that are of ultimate importance, not just of some importance.
So you mentioned that you were heavily aware for a while and then life continued.
Yeah.
But was there a shift back into that awareness, or how did you manage to keep those questions on the forefront for the last 12 years?
There was a period of time, I call it the days of grace, D-A-Z-E or D-A-Y-S, either one. I kind of walked around in a daze, and I'm wearing a neck brace. So for 12 weeks I wore this neck brace, so I was aware every day. I almost died, and I would walk outside and say, wow, grass, it's just beautiful. Look how green it is. Look at the sky, those clouds. Oh, it's so great. Like a hippie from the 1960s, But yeah, it would be great to live like that every day. But you never get anything done. You just kind of walk around in the days, And I have deadlines, and I have to balance my checkbook, and my brother has a stroke, and I have to look after him, and life just it just pounds away at you, and I think it's important for all of us to find those pauses. I live in a place of natural beauty, the state of Colorado. You have a lot here in Singapore. I think every Christian should go to your bird park once a month.
Bird park.
Your bird park, yeah. And just be reminded of the magnificent artist that God is, Or the orchid display at the Marina Park going on right now, in the Flower Dome. It's amazing. It's just amazing. And we need to force ourselves to do those times. For some people it is nature. For me it is. For some people it's silence. It's unplugging from mobile phones and computers and all that. But enforce times to kind of stop that treadmill, because life will constantly keep throwing that treadmill at you, like little hamsters, they keep running.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I guess the last 2 questions would be about your books. In terms of, you talk about, because of those questions, you decided you needed to be more intentional about your deadlines and everything. then this year you released Fearful and Wonderfully Made, which is one of the earliest books that you've written. So what is it about that book that was so important that you want to say it again?
I grew up with a very unhealthy church background and very unhealthy rendition of what faith is, what our Christian faith is, and reacted against that by just kind of backing away completely. And as a journalist, when I was writing Where's God When It Hurts, I met this Dr. Paul Brand and eventually spent 10 years following him around. And I look back on it now as a cocoon period of my faith. You know, first there's the caterpillar, and then the cocoon, and then the butterfly. And that was definitely the cocoon period because I didn't know what I could. I couldn't really say this I believe. I didn't know what to believe. I knew what not to believe. I didn't know what to believe. And as a journalist, though, when I met Dr. Brand, I realized even though I'm unable to write about my own faith, I can write about his faith because he lives it out in a very attractive and convincing way. And it really only takes one person like that to convince you there's something here. I mean, Jesus was like that. Why did these disciples leave their careers and just followed him around? There's something about that guy, you know. And I didn't have a father. My father died when I was just 1 year old. So Dr. Brand became a father figure for me, I'm sure a psychologist would say. And it was true. And he had wrestled with all the questions that bothered me. He taught me a lot about pain and suffering through his experience with leprosy. So those were really formative books for me. And they have been out for almost 40 years. A lot has changed since then. The science has changed. The medicine has changed. Some of the social commentary we make has changed a lot. And readers have changed. Readers are less tolerant. They're more impatient because, you know, we're flipping from one thing to another. So I had written 2 books, Fearfully and Wonderfully Made, and then In His Image. And I went through and chose kind of the best of both and edited them, updated the science, the medicine, added some other things, and edited them more for a millennial type audience. As a gift to the church, right? I'm not making money on it, but as a way of introducing a new generation of readers to somebody they should know. Dr. Brand is an authentic hero. An authentic Christian hero, and we need those. So it was just a way to perpetuate the legacy of a great man.
Okay. So if you talk about this new generation, bringing these topics to the new generation of readers, why is this such an important message for them to know? Why do you think? I mean, is it something that you think that they don't know about it or they haven't thought about it? Is there any of that? Or?
Right. Well, yes. Dr. Brand had the most innovative understanding of pain of anybody I've ever met. I mean, when I was writing the book, Where is God When It Hurts, I was reading all these books about the problem of pain, the curse of pain, the mistake of pain. And Dr. Brand said, are you kidding me? Thank God for pain. If I had one gift to give to my leprosy patients, it would be pain. Because look at them. They're blind. They've lost their hands. They've lost their feet. For one reason only, they don't feel pain. Wow, that was a wake-up call. I knew nothing about that. And he had thought through the kind of questions that were haunting me about pain. So that's one area. But more than that, in the modern world, we're very good at taking things apart and dividing them. So the experts over here, or the scientists are over here, very particular little slice of science. And the theologians are over here, but these people don't understand these people. These people don't understand these people, you know. And Dr. Brand was one who puts the world together. He looks at the creation around us and sees behind the curtain, you know, because he tried to invent a pain system. He was paid money by the Rockefeller Foundation to invent a pain system to protect his patients. So he had to think like God in a way. And that's a unique understanding that was so helpful to me. How should this world have been different? What could God have done in a different way? But putting together theology and the Bible and science, that was a unique gift that he did. And then a further thing is the way he perceives the church. I had always perceived the church as like a corporation. It's got a CEO up here, the pastor, and then these wannabes down here, you know. And Dr. Brand said, no, actually, the church is like a body, and in fact, it's called that 30 times in the New Testament, and the New Testament spells out in what way it's like a body. Okay, we know that, those of us who grew up in the church, but as a doctor who understood anatomy, he was able to look at different parts of it, white blood cells and amoebas and the immune system and bones. Why do they bones break? What would happen if we made them stronger? You know, all those different pieces, and in a very innovative way, creative way, draw analogies. And I think that's something that we really need today. Because we're so used to thinking in terms of organizations. For instance, I'm speaking at this leadership conference, just attended some of the seminars, and it's all about hierarchy and all of that. And we have to organize in that way. Government's organized in that way. Corporations are organized. But the body is not. The body is organized in a very different way. And I think the church should be distinctive, should be different from the government, from corporations. And I think the fact that we don't understand it is one reason why there are so many divisions. You know, society is not very good at combining something like unity and diversity. You know, how can you have these diverse elements that are all working for the same goal? In the United States, we're just being ripped apart over those issues. Racism and those kind of issues. Well, the body is a beautiful example of how that the cells are so diverse. You look at a nerve cell, you look at a blood cell, you look at a bone cell, and they look like they came from completely different creatures, but each has its role, and the body doesn't work without each of them doing that role. And as Paul said in his longest talk about the body in 1 Corinthians 12, it's the parts that we don't know what to do with that are the most important of all. And I asked doctors, what do you think he's talking about? And they said, well, kidney cells, bowel cells. If they stopped working, you die. You can get along without eye cells, you can get along without ear cells, but you can't get along without kidney cells, bowel cells. And that's kind of the counterculture aspect of Christianity. It's the least of these that are the most important. These are the ones that God cares about. So how are we caring about? The body metaphor, the analogy, teaches us something that you don't really learn from government or corporations.
Okay. Thank you for your time. Just last question is, you talk about your last words, crafting your last words. Would you be willing to share what would you want your last words to be?
My last words?
To be remembered for?
Well, for the last 3 years, I've been working on a memoir. And so I've spent a lot of time going through my life. We all have things that we wish were different. And certainly the family I grew up in, the church I grew up in, for a good portion of my life, I would say, man, I wish it was different. But in the process of doing this memoir, I've been able to kind of stitch together the different parts of my life, and I really don't wish it was different. I guess what I've learned that God is a redeeming God, that God can take the things that we most resent about ourselves and can turn them into gifts. And when I look back over the things I've written, the two themes that keep coming up are suffering and grace, those two things. And I guess I'd have to come up with some way to combine the two in something you could carve on a tombstone. I'll leave somebody else that job. I'll be dead, but
You haven't thought of it?
No, not but those are the two things that as a writer I've spent most of my time trying to come to terms with.
Okay. Would you be able to summarize those two things in one sentence each? Like one thing about suffering that we can remember, and one thing about grief.
Boy, as a writer, you just hate to kind of throw words out there. You want to stare at them and revise them.
Okay.
The concept of suffering that means most to me is the concept of redeemed pain.
Okay.
Redeemed pain can be more impressive to me than removed pain. You know, we always want God to remove our pain, but it doesn't usually happen. Sometimes people come up and say, what's your favorite verse in the Bible? I say, I don't do verses, I'll do chapters. Romans 8 is my favorite chapter because it talks about how God can redeem. In Paul's experience, it included a lot of suffering, shipwreck and snake bite and torture and prison. And at the end, he concluded, yet in all these things, God can use them for my good, did use them for my good in his case. So that would be the concept of suffering. And then on grace, I guess just the shocking awareness that God is gooder than we can imagine. That God truly is a shockingly understanding, compassionate, forgiving God whose essence is love. That's so different than the image of God I had growing up. But I think that's the whole message of the Bible in a nutshell.
Thanks very much for your time.
Sure.
Thank you.